meeting of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. I'd like to remind colleagues that today's meeting will be televised and it's going to be available via the House of Commons website. Pursuant to the motion adopted by this committee on Friday, December the 11th, 2020, the committee is resuming its study on the protection of privacy and reputation on platforms such as Pornhub. Today, we have three witnesses with us. We have Melissa Lukings, who's the Jewish doctor candidate, Faculty of Law, University of New Brunswick. We have the Canadian Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform, Jennifer Clayman, who's the national director, and we have Sandra Wesley, who's the executive director at Stella. We'll turn it over to our witnesses. I believe we'll start with Melissa Lukings for your opening statement, followed by the others. Ms. Lukings, the floor is yours.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Yes, cool. I'm just quickly sending my speaking note. Just have to open up. Email, Miriam. Just send it after. Oh, I'll send it after. Hi, I am Melissa Lukings. I was born in
Rappel au règlement, Madame, Monsieur le Président.
Call to order. There's a problem with the interpretation.
We'll just check the translation if we could. I'll just say a few words, and if it's coming through, I'm seeing head nods that maybe it's all right. I think the static is now gone from my headpiece, and the translation must be working. Ms. Lukings, we'll turn it back to you. Apologize for the interruption.
No worries. Okay. I was born in Ontario in 1989. I moved to Newfoundland.
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order.
Pardon me, again, point of order, recognizing the point of order. I think the static has returned and the translation is...
Is it me?
Non, en fait, l'enjeu, c'est l'appareil.
The issue is the audio device. Ah, now you've put it back on. Excellent, thank you.
Perfect. I think that the headset may alleviate some of this challenge. Okay. Thanks so much. We'll turn it back to you, Ms. Lukings. Yeah.
Okay. I moved to Newfoundland in 2007, and then I moved to New Brunswick in 2018. I have an undergraduate degree from Memorial University of Newfoundland in linguistics and psychology, and I'm working on my law degree, the Juris Doctor from the University of New Brunswick. So my background includes 13 years of lived experience in sex work. So from 2008 to 2014, I was an employee at an adult erotic massage parlor in St. John's, Newfoundland, which was called Executive Suite Spa. At 2014 until 2018. So for 4 years, I managed or operated, but also worked at another erotic massage parlor, and that was called Studio Aura. I've also worked independently from 2018 to the present. So if we look at those dates, we'll notice something super fun, and that is that I've actually been working in sex work since before the Bedford outcome happened. So that started in 2008. The Bedford outcome was in 2013, followed by C-36 in 2014. So there's some interesting overlap there. Within those years of lived experience, 8 years involved a degree of sexual exploitation. So again, we're having some overlap here. And the exploitation was very interestingly related to cryptocurrencies, data mining, and business development in Newfoundland and Labrador. So I feel that my perspective is kind of all the different sides. Well, not all, I haven't been trafficked, but exploitation certainly, and sex work as well. My recent relevant volunteer experience includes Newfoundland and Labrador Sexual Assault Crisis and Prevention Center, the Community Coalition for Mental Health NL, the Schizophrenia Society of Newfoundland and Labrador, Safe Harbor Outreach Project, HeartOnTheRock.com, Reproductive Justice New Brunswick, Save Clinic 554, Safe Space London, Canadian Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform, now, And my current relevant work experience is that I'm a cybersecurity law researcher. So I'm particularly interested in dark web content, regulation, cryptocurrencies, decentralization, all of that within the law, Canadian perspective, sex work legal regulation research. And I've also just finished publication of a 10-piece article series on understanding Canadian cybersecurity laws with IT World Canada. So the perspective that I wanted to share obviously is one of decriminalization of sex work, but also regulation of surface web content and the recognition of the differences between surface, deep, and dark web content and the realities that go along with the legal enforcement of those areas. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll turn to Ms. Clayman, Ms. Jennifer Clayman.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jen Clayman. Am I doing the presentation now or just an introduction of myself?
No, your presentation, please.
Amazing. Okay, so my name is Jen Clayman. I'm the National Coordinator of the Canadian Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform. We are an alliance of 25 groups across the country of sex worker rights groups, the majority of which are led by people working in the sex industry, by sex workers working in the sex industry. The alliance was created in 2012 as a means of getting sex workers' voices to people like you, to Parliament, as a means of building respect and legitimacy for the voices of sex workers and the experiences of sex workers where we are otherwise ignored and not taken seriously. And also the Alliance was really created as a mechanism for sex workers to get involved in the policies and practices that affect their everyday lives. And that's the work we do together. So that's where I want to focus my intervention today, is on the ways and the duty of parliamentarians to take direction and leadership from sex workers who are really best placed to speak to any policy or practice that may regulate online sex work or online porn. I'll start by saying that it's important, obviously, and we all feel that it's really important to remain really critical of abusive and exploitative practices on the internet, and more so for people who are targeted for violence. Sex workers understand this. We have been organizing for over 50 years against violence and abuse in the industry. It's why we started organizing. We didn't start organizing for the right to work in the industry. We started organizing against abuse and violence. And for this reason, sex workers are the best place to be at the center of this discussion, because sex workers are mitigating violence all of the time in the context of criminalization and stigma that is perpetuated against the industry. So I want to talk about meaningful consultation and why it's so important, and also how to do it. We've been involved in so many of these parliamentary discussions, and people talk about consultation, and we get invited last minute on a Friday evening to a meeting on Monday morning, and some people might not know how to do consultation, and that's okay, but we're here to explain how to do that as well. We want to teach you how to do that and hope that you're open to those learnings. The committee so far, your committee hearings, have really promoted a set of values that have been extremely damaging for sex workers to watch across the country and across North America. Our Alliance member groups, as well as individual sex workers across Canada and the States, have been pressuring for a seat at this table since day one of these hearings. And on day one of these hearings, you all heard from Rape Relief as a means of framing the discussion, and they framed it, not surprisingly, as one of exploitation. And that has been really clear to sex workers and really harmful to sex workers across the country. It is made clear that sex workers are not welcome at this table and are not considered valued participants. We were told outright that this committee didn't concern us, and it hasn't been safe for sex workers to come and publicly testify as a result in this, what we consider a hostile setting. So I want to talk about meaningful consultation and what it means that you need to do. And I'm happy to send this all by written form, because what meaningful consultation is something that we consulted our members on years ago, and we wrote down for exact moments like this. So meaningful consultation means treating sex workers like experts on the impacts of sex work related laws. So often the only people who are treated as experts in conversations like the ones happening in this committee are lawyers, academics, politicians, social workers, and in the case of this committee, people who don't work in the sex industry. So sex workers are most affected by any regulation, and sex workers' perspectives need to be at the center of your discussions. Meaningful consultation also means proportionately weighing the consultation based on who is affected by the laws. So sex workers currently working in the sex industry are most affected and live the experience of criminalization and regulation every day. So their perspectives should hold more weight for all of you who are considering regulation. Meaningful consultation also means scrutinizing who is considered an expert on sex work issues. Exodus Cry, Rape Relief, RCMP. Hard no on all of that from our end. But how can any of these people explain to you how exploitation or violence happens in the industry when they don't work in the industry? They're merely providing an ideological perspective. Meaningful consultation also means gathering experts by asking sex workers who their allied organizations are in community groups where they access services. So we've been trying to present you lists and lists of people who you can speak to from day one, and unfortunately that's gone unignored. And I'm not just chastising you. Please see this as more than me chastising what this committee hasn't done. It's really an invitation to open and change the way things are moving forward so that anything that's, any regulation or any policy moving forward is actually centering sex workers at its base. Meaningful consultation also means accounting for structural barriers in your consultation. So considering anonymity for sex workers who have the right to remain anonymous, who have to remain anonymous, or consider pseudonyms and not showing their face. It means offering in-camera or private face-to-face dialogues with sex workers and chosen supporters. It means ensuring that there's sufficient time in the lead up to the conversations to allow sex workers to prepare for these moments of intervention. It means providing information in advance on the kinds of questions you're asking, on the kinds of interrogations you're doing. And it means making particular efforts to contact communities of sex workers, of more marginalized sex workers, like racialized sex workers, Indigenous sex workers, Black sex workers, trans sex workers. And it means holding informal meetings around these kinds of conversations for sex workers who are marginalized, particularly by poverty, immigration status, or indigeneity. This committee has received briefs and written testimony from sex workers who've experienced violence in the industry. And this testimony outlines how violence happens and makes suggestions for ways to mitigate that violence. Every industry has violations. Industries that are criminalized and stigmatized have more so, and we need to work to address them. The most basic premise here would be the inclusion and centering and leadership of people who are experiencing those violations. No other industry would create regulation without the input of the workers. This committee has the challenge of addressing exploitation that some people experience without infringing on the rights of sex workers. And the people on the front lines of this industry, sex workers, are best placed to help shape any existing or proposed regulation. So any approach that fails to consider the needs of sex workers will harm sex workers, I promise you. And sex workers are systematically ignored in policy that impacts on our lives. Consultation isn't an easy process. In 2007, our Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform held a consultation over a year and a half of our member groups and sex workers in our member groups to create a series of 54 recommendations for law and policy reform. It was a collective process to write those recommendations. And those recommendations are a clear rejection of criminal sanctions and other repressive measures of the industry, not based on ideology, but based on the impacts of that regulation. So those recommendations are underscored by a series of principles that I want to share with you because I think the committee could benefit from this set of principles based on the hearings so far and the ways that these conversations have been going. We've been listening very closely, but this committee really needs a dose of neutrality and rather than ideology and a dose of evidence. So we want to share with you some of these principles that underscored our recommendations. One, that selling or trading sexual services is not inherently immoral, harmful, or a public nuisance. Sex work does not inherently damage the physical or mental health of those who do it, and sex workers do not become unfit employees, parents, tenants, customers, clients, or people who can testify at committees. Stigma towards sex work and against sex workers is real and pervasive, and it's deeply ingrained in Canadian society and around the world, and it contributes to harassment, discrimination, violence, and abuse. It also contributes to bad policy, as we've been seeing in the discussions in this committee. Laws and policies and their enforcement often reflect and reinforce the stigma or encourage or tolerate the abuses that flow from it. So eliminating stigma against sex workers needs to be...
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Pardon me.
Am I going too long?
Point of order, Ms.
Oui, l'enjeu, c'est que je ne veux pas manquer aucune phrase de votre témoignage.
Je comprends bien.
I don't want to lose a single sentence.
L'interprétation ne fonctionne plus depuis quelques secondes. Donc, voilà, Monsieur le Président.
J'ai pas entendu. What's not?
What is not functioning? The interpretation was not functioning.
I think it's not working both on the English and the French. I was not getting the translation as well. I wonder, I just want to make sure that is everyone's headset plugged fully into their computer? There seems to be a fair bit of a significant amount of static that seems to be coming through. Just want to verify, Ms. Clayman, if you're.
Oh, my headset. Sorry, I thought you were talking to everybody else. My headset is plugged in.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, but I have a hard time hearing her. I know she's speaking, but her sound seems to be a bit muffled by a very background noise that I hear just shh all along, and I'm having a hard time. Yeah,
that's what I'm trying to identify. I think there's a little bit of static that we're all hearing.
I'm not hearing any static on my end.
Okay.
And do you have a fan on? Like a bathroom fan?
Nothing.
Oh.
Okay. Very good.
I can hear you.
Mr. Fergus, I see your hand is raised. You may have a suggestion.
Oui, tout comme Madame Gaudreau,
Yes, as was the case with Madame Gaudreau. When you began to speak, I couldn't hear you at all. I didn't hear any of that background noise, but now I'm hearing it. Marie-Hélène, do you hear the same thing that I'm hearing? But when Mr. Workington was talking, I didn't hear it.
Thank you. And I just wanted to verify that I've asked the technicians to look to verify as to where that static is coming from. It is coming from somewhere. I'm not sure where that is, but let us try to get through this. Hopefully the technicians are able to identify it and eliminate it. Ms. Clayman, we'll turn back to you.
Sure. Hopefully you can hear me say that the irony of you not being able to hear me while I'm talking about sex workers not being heard is not lost. Hopefully I'll give you a little smile for the day. Maybe you can't hear that. Marie-Hélène Gaudreau, you cannot hear me say it still? You can. Okay, you thought my joke was funny. Fantastic. So I'll just continue on some of the principles that underscored our recommendations. The last few are around how singling out sex workers and activities related to sex work for additional prohibitive or additional repression is virtually always harmful for people working in the sex industry. And some of the briefs that you've received, particularly the one from the BCC, from West Coast Leaf and other partners, really outline the evidence around that. So any legislation or policy or repressive measure that you're thinking of right now should really maximize the autonomy of sex workers to be able to work as safely as possible in keeping with sex workers' human rights to safe working conditions, liberty, privacy, non-discrimination, and dignity. There's also there's been a lot of, I'll finish up now, but there's been a lot of discussion around youth in this committee as well. A lot of conflation of issues with youth and exploitation and sex industry and human trafficking. These words are being bandied about very carelessly. In our recommendations for law reform, we also took the time with the hundreds and hundreds of sex workers to talk about recommendations for youth. And I also wanted to share those with you too, because our recommendations really stem from recognizing the agency of people, and that includes people under 18. And by agency, we mean the capacity to think and the capacity to make decisions in a given set of conditions that anybody is living on. The entire focus on child exploitation and human trafficking in this committee has been completely overblown. That is not to suggest these things don't exist in real space and time, but they have been overblown with respect to the conversations in this committee. The framing of all content online as youth exploitation really undermines sex workers' ability to keep safe and makes it harder to address violence in the industry. When we see everything as violence in the industry, it's hard to understand when sex workers are actually experiencing violence. So Alliance member groups recommend the following principles with respect to understanding youth in any regulation that involves youth. A harm reduction approach that requires authorities to use the least intrusive approach towards youth with an emphasizing on preserving community. A recognition that repression, apprehension, detention, and rehabilitation are often experienced as antagonistic and traumatic, and often push youth away from supports rather than towards supports. The Alliance member groups also recommend a reliance on existing laws rather than the creation of new laws, additional regulations, and law enforcement measures that move people away from supports rather than towards supports. So I'll conclude by saying that last week we heard Bill Blair say that all sex workers were fearing as a result of this committee, but we were assured it had nothing to do with this committee. But we heard Bill Blair say that he was thinking of creating a new regulatory body that would be created for online content. We can't stress enough that more regulation is not the answer, and that it will just actually harm sex workers and harm the industry in general with respect to sex workers' rights. There's also the ongoing parallel work of Bill S-0203 submitted to the Senate by Julie Deschênes. And on top of this, there's the continual refusal of Parliament to decriminalize sex work, despite the evidence that regulation and criminalization harm sex workers. Targeting internet sex work during a pandemic is such an aggressive and violent move on your part and on the part of everybody who's considering regulation right now. The internet has been a safe haven for so many workers who are unable to face the conditions of COVID, like so many other workers, sex workers. Some sex workers, but not all, have moved online and have been able to support themselves this way. So it is important now more than ever to protect these spaces and to ensure that sex workers can continue to work without violence and exploitation. So if you want to know how to protect people on platforms like Pornhub, create a committee, sit down with people who actually post their content on Pornhub, sit down with sex workers and talk to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wesley. We'll turn to you now for your opening statement. We'll turn it over to you for 7 minutes.
Hi, so my name is Sandra Wesley. Normalement, je témoignerais en français.
Normally, I would testify in French because we're a Montreal group. However, with all of the issues with translation and the brief time, I'm going to actually proceed in English, and I apologize, Madame Gondreau, and to the other francophones.
Très contente de répondre.
But I'll be very happy to take any questions in French afterwards.
Again, I want to be very clear. This committee's hostility towards sex workers will contribute to violence against us. The actions so far of this committee have been hostile and have contributed to harming sex workers. And any further repressive measures against sex workers will absolutely kill many of us. This is the level of seriousness that this is for us. Every demeaning thing, every dehumanizing thing that is said is heard loud and clear by every aggressor, abuser, and exploiter out there. We've seen it recently in Atlanta with a man who aimed to eradicate all massage parlors. All Asian massage parlors went and killed several women in massage parlors. And we see this time and time again when our governments send out a message that they want to eradicate us. People take that into their own hands and find different ways of carrying out the government's mandate. So Stella is an organization by and for sex workers. We were created in Montreal in 1995. We represent sex workers. We are sex workers ourselves. We do not represent or defend the rights of third parties in the industry. We have no opinion on any specific company or individual that works around sex workers. We're not for or against. Some websites work very well for some people and can be the absolute worst for someone else. However, third parties are necessary for a lot of sex workers, and especially when we're working online, the average sex worker does not have the time, energy, and knowledge to create her own entire website, distribution method, payment processor. We need to work with other people. So our community is very diverse and broad. It includes women who work in porn full-time, part-time, people who perform in videos with other performers, solo videos, videos they produce themselves or with third parties, women who post content on major platforms such as Pornhub or on smaller online communities or their own websites, women who do live work on camera versus pre-recorded videos, and people who work through all kinds of different models, including a lot of women who combine some online work with other types of sex work in person or remotely. It's very important to not have a narrow view of pornography while you're focusing on one single website and to make regulations for one website while ignoring the massive diversity of the sex industry. So this inquiry, we can't make any specific assumption about why you decided to investigate Pornhub specifically. However, we can certainly witness the context in which this is happening. In December 2020, an article was published by the New York Times denouncing Pornhub specifically and making all kinds of claims about its content and procedures. To our community of women working in the sex industry, this type of sensational reporting is nothing new. It's been happening, consistently over many decades. Anti-porn activists and anti-sex work activists have been active for a long time, and this is how they operate. They try to come up with the most sensational, the most dramatic stories and to put them out into the media to get a reaction out of society. And over time, their overt arguments against porn in general have become less effective. So discourse has shifted to talking about violence and exploitation, trafficking, or about the presence of youth in the sex industry. But these extremely emotional arguments are not necessarily representative of the true objectives of those groups or of the reality of sex work. And what it's doing is that it's creating this big dichotomy where it's positioning people as you can either be against exploitation and therefore against sex work and pornography, or you can be in favor of sex workers' rights, and somehow that's being construed as being supportive of that kind of exploitation. So I urge you in your duties as members of parliament that are sworn to work within the charter, not on emotion, to take a step back and to look in a more objective and non-ideological manner at the situation and what led you to deciding to spend so much time on the follow-up of a New York Times article, which was written by a journalist with a very long history of exploitative reporting, of sensational reporting, not just about sex work, but about sexual violence in general. And this particular reporter also has been called out in the past for writing an entirely fabricated story of trafficking organization, which raised a lot of money for this completely fake organization. So we know that this is not someone with high standards, and we know that this is someone who has been very willing to use his position as a reporter to push an anti-sex work ideology. You've also heard about who instigated campaigns against Pornhub and who you've actually heard from. One of those groups has a new name now. It's called the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. This is a recent rebranding of a group known as Morality in Media. Morality in Media is a group that was founded in the early 70s or maybe late 60s. Specifically, their initial mandate was that they wanted to eradicate all erotica literature from bookstores. Because they felt that that went against their Christian values. Over time, they are well known in the United States for such campaigns as boycotting Disney in the 90s because of their non-Christian content, wanting to eradicate national endowments for the arts because they were worried that some artists might be making some sexual content, boycotting Madonna and other pop artists. And so ultimately, what they want is the eradication of all content from the internet or society that does not meet their view of heterosexual Christian monogamous relationships. A few years ago, seeing that this message was not getting them anywhere, they rebranded and focus now on this notion of sexual exploitation and human trafficking, because those are the buzzwords that get everyone from every party to stop and listen to them. So this is who instigated this. Obviously not anyone that has the well-being of women or sex workers at heart. The other group, Exodus Cry, is also rebranding over the past few years, but is a fundamentally religious group with very violent views, specifically towards the LGBTQ2S+ community. Their goal is to, also eradicate all sex that doesn't meet their Christian standard. They're violently anti-gay, violently anti-trans, and violently against sex workers. They despise us and want to eliminate us. So collectively, those groups obviously are not friends of sex workers, and starting an inquiry based on their assessment of a problem will never lead to anything positive within the community. Their only goal is to eradicate pornography. You've heard also from some groups who brand themselves as feminists, who have also very ideological views. Instead of maybe a religious argument, they bring forward an argument based in their view of feminism, which is being increasingly marginalized marginalized and excluded from mainstream feminism. They're fundamentally anti-trans, anti-sex workers, and they also shared the religious group's goal of eradicating us. So they cannot be listened to when it comes to making our work safer, when it comes to tweaking anything in our industry to improve anyone's safety, because their goal is not that. We've seen also a long history of repressive measures against sex work on the internet, and repressive measures against the internet in general, where sex work is the excuse to push that forward. In the 90s, when the internet became a more common consumer-based thing in the United States, those same groups mobilized because they wanted to essentially ban the internet. And the United States at that point was able to pass a law which included a section that makes websites not liable for the content on their platforms. And this is the reason why we have the internet as we know it today. The first time that any erosion of those rights happened was SESTA and FOSTA, again in the United States a few years ago, which created an exception to Section 230, which now makes websites liable for sex work happening on their platforms. This has had devastating impacts, and you can look up what sex workers have had to say about SESTA and FOSTA in the United States and elsewhere. It has led to a lot of deaths, a lot of violence, and it's opening the door to further and further regulating the internet to the point where all kinds of content gets captured under this increased censorship that we're seeing. So we've seen websites, for example, Tumblr, which had sexual content, just simply choose to just get rid of all the sexual content, which had nothing to do with sex work for the most part, just in case they were caught up in it. We've seen Facebook that has banned eggplant emojis and peach emojis, which is kind of funny on one level, but is also an indication of how this liability for companies leads to very drastic eradication of sexual content. It's making it harder for queer youth, for young people in general, to get sexual education online, because that also gets captured under pornographic content that should be eradicated. So I want to address a little bit about what sex workers actually need when it comes to...
Ms. Wesley, I do apologize. You are now several minutes over the allotted time. I'm wondering if you could move to a conclusion so we can allow for questions.
Yeah,
I just don't want to eliminate the members' opportunity to ask questions.
Sure, I'll go over super quickly the needs and the conclusion. So there are 4 broad categories of needs that we've identified for sex workers who work online and for anyone who uses the internet for any kind of sexual content. The first thing is income. We work in the sex industry to make money. So any policy that takes away our source of income is not feminist, is not helpful, and is another form of violence against us. Security, we need to avoid being outed. So any policy that involves putting our legal name forward exposes us to all kinds of violence and is not okay for us. Privacy, we need to be able to operate without putting our legal information out there. And we've heard from some people that have told you that they wanted, for example, a registry of everyone who owns a porn company, who has performed in porn, accesses porn. What that does is that it will eliminate every small porn production company and only leave some major companies that have the money required to hire lawyers, to have other people put their names on the company so that the performers are not outed. So that's extremely problematic for us. And we need also dignity. We need to be treated as valuable human beings. We need to have our work recognized and valued. And government needs to stop acting like we're political pawns to be just used whenever there's a need to rile up the population or to create a moral panic. So as long as this government wants to eradicate sex workers, as this government is doing through the criminal code when it comes to sex work, violence will continue, and there will be no solutions to make it safer for anyone, for people that are there willingly and for people that are that have their videos put against their consent online. So as sex workers, we're not willing to sacrifice our lives for your moral panic or your anti-porn project. We are demanding that our rights be respected, and we want our allies who normally support sex workers' rights to not forget everything they've learned over the years the moment we're talking about pornography.
Thank you. We'll turn to our members' questions now. We'll start with Mr. Viersen for the first questions. Mr. Viersen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and Thank you for the witnesses for making time to appear at our committee today. I'm not sure if the members are aware, but on Friday, the Pulitzer Prize winning New York Times journalist Nicholas Kristof released another significant column on this story around online exploitation that our committee has studied. It's an incredibly compelling article, and I hope that all of you have had a chance to read it. He highlights a story of a Canadian survivor from Alberta. That's where I'm from, and I wanted to share her story. So Mr. Kristof writes, Heather Lagarde is a young woman from Alberta. She felt the world crashing down on her last August when she discovered that her ex-husband had posted intimate images of her online. She told me and people around the world were gazing at her naked body. I'm all over the internet, she told me sadly. It's not what I wanted to be famous for. Worst of all, in one of the videos, her former husband sexually assaulted her as she lay unconscious on their bed. Lagarde has no recollection of the assault and no idea how the video was made. One clue was it was tagged as sleeping pills. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have?
I'll just verify that. I do apologize. You have plenty of time. I'll just verify though with the clerk. Go ahead, Mr. Beerson.
All right. Over 200,000 people had watched her video of her being assaulted while she lay drugged and unconscious. So on that day in August, mortified, dizzied by her discovery of the betrayal, Lagarde prepared to tie a noose. I was standing in my garage under a beam, holding onto a rope, she recalled, but finally she changed her mind. I said to myself, if this is your situation, he'll do it to someone else tomorrow. So Lagarde resolved to her own story and fought back. So now it doesn't have to happen to other girls. We've heard several stories like this from people who have come to this committee. And Nicholas Kristof points out that this isn't about pornography. This is about rape and sexual abuse. He's also heard from a Canadian student who said, I have no problem with consensual adults making porn. Her concern is that many people in the pornographic videos weren't consenting adults like her. Kristof writes, after she turned 14, a man enticed her to engage in a sexual play over Skype. He secretly recorded her. A clip, along with her full name, ended up on Xvideos, the world's most visited pornography site. Google searches help direct people to this illegal footage of child sexual abuse. This Canadian student shared with Kristof how she begged Xvideos to remove the clip. Instead, Xvideos hosted 2 more copies so that hundreds of thousands of people could leer at her at her most mortifying moment in her life. I also want to highlight another study that just came out at the beginning of the month that may be important to this committee's work. The study, published in the British Journal of Criminology, looked at the ways in which mainstream pornography positions sexual assault violence as normative sexual script by analyzing videos and titles found in the landing sites of these 3 most popular pornography sites in the United Kingdom: Xvideos, Pornhub, and Xhamster. The study drew the largest research sample on online pornographic content to date, over 130,000 unique, and it's unique in its focus on the content immediately advertised to the new user. The academics found that 1 in 8 titles shown to a first-time user on the main page of porn sites depicted sexual violence or non-consensual content. Mr. Chair, we have heard from people from across the spectrum around how they have been targeted and exploited by companies such as Pornhub, and that is what this study is all about. Kate was 15 years old. Her ex was 20. He was always into homemade videos and stuff, and he videotaped her. One day, he said, let me show you something. She tried to get the content taken off of Pornhub. It took her years to get rid of that content. Rosa, she was 16. She was drunk at a friend's party. She woke up and there was naked pictures of her on Pornhub with her name and her phone number. She had endless calls and texts. She had to change her number. Nicole was 14. She made a decision that changed her life. She was having a sexual FaceTime with someone she didn't know. I didn't know anything about him, his name or his age or anything. But I showed him areas of her, she says, I showed him areas of my body that were private. I didn't know at the time, but he was recording it and uploaded it to Pornhub. The name of the video was even Young Teen, but that wasn't enough for Pornhub to analyze it and take it down. No, years later, classmates of mine found out about me and the pornography that was shot of me as I was a child. I've had the police involved multiple occasions, and I cannot get the videos taken down. This is a video of Rosala, who was raped when she was 14, and yet it is still up on Pornhub. Kira, at the age of 15, was coerced into making a film of a sexual act. The video had been uploaded without her consent to Pornhub. The uploader was also underage and had no way confirming anyone's age or consent. I've been dealing with image issues, PTSD, sexual discomfort since the incident into adulthood. This is my personal account, and I have heard similar stories from other women. I will never forgive Pornhub for allowing my abuse and shared publicly that it caused me to relive my pain year over year over year.
Mr. Viersen, you are out of time. I do apologize, but I'm going to interrupt.
These are just some of the stories of victims who have been victims of Pornhub, and that is what this study is about. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We're at time. Ms. Latanzio, we'll turn to you for the next 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We, first off, I wanted to thank the witnesses for taking the time on such short notice to be with us this morning, and do know that you are all very much welcome at this table. I feel bad actually that the two witnesses did not even get an opportunity, Mr. Chair, to respond to Mr. Viersen's intervention. So I must tell you right off the bat that the information that we received this morning from the three eloquent speakers has been very much informative, and more work needs to be done. And I'm not too sure. I feel pressed, Mr. Chair, that we need to hurry on and get on with asking the questions this morning. But there's just so much more to learn from these three witnesses. So I'll start with Ms. Clayman. So Ms. Clayman, I know you have your hand up, but I know you. I don't know if you want to respond already. But anyways, what are currently the biggest challenges that sex workers face in regard to the platforms today?
Thank you, Ms. Latanzio, for your recognition that we actually said something today. Mr. Viersen's, I will start by saying, if you don't mind, Mr. Viersen's intervention was the exact reason that we don't want to come to committees like this, but at the same time, why we are compelled to. The discrediting, I mean, it's a very common tactic. We had three people come and present, and the first thing that Mr. Viersen does is not ask a question of clarification or show any interest in anything we said, but completely discredit all of our testimony and presentation by, heralding Nicholas Kristof as some god. And also conflating all of the issues. He actually provided, and I do thank you for this, Mr. Viersen, for doing this. You provided a really good example of the way conflation happens, telling really horrific stories of abuse and rape that Madame Lagarde experienced, which is something that we've been fighting for as feminists, as people in the sex industry for so long, mixing that story with stories of people actually who are working in the industry, little lines here and there. We're talking about, oh, well, we're not sure who's consenting or not, and then moving on to stories about 15-year-olds with their partners, and weaving in and out of these tales and these testimonies in a way that suggests that everything is exploitation is the exact reason why this committee, unfortunately, is in large part failing. Because in testimonies like Mr. Viersen's, it's in large part why the committee is failing to actually ask the right questions, which, for example, like you're asking right now, what are the concerns of sex workers? Thank you for asking. So some of the concerns of sex workers online right now are a lot of the repression that's happening. There's a huge level of fear. Sex workers are being kicked off online platforms. Credit card companies are scared because of the constant threat of more repression, or the threat of being accused of being child traffickers when there is no evidence to support this. So credit card companies who are backing out. So it's harder for sex workers, point blank, to earn money, and particularly in the context of a pandemic where sex workers have received zero to no support from the government. Most were not able to or did not want to access the CERB for fear of being outed as a sex worker. So in that context, where sex workers have moved online to make money, some of them, it's becoming increasingly harder to make money, and sex workers are living increasingly in poverty. So that repression is making it really hard for people to work. And so, yeah.
And so what changes do you think need to be made to be able to protect individuals from having their images posted without their consent? What recommendations would you have for this committee in that regard?
I mean, as far as we understand, there are laws that exist already to prevent that. There are existing laws around privacy. There are existing laws around people who are under 18, whether or not that actually stands in line with our recommendations of the Alliance. There are those existing laws that can just be applied. Additional repressive measures are not what we would recommend. And that's all that I have to say on that. But if the committee is considering additional repressive measures, they need to sit down with sex workers to develop those.
I'm wondering if Ms. Lukens had an answer to that same very question, as I saw your hand go up as I was posing it.
I sure do. Okay, so first I'd like to talk about what Mr. Viersen said. It sounded like you were describing parts of my life, actually. I was once given temazepam, which knocks you right out. Videos were made of me. So I get it. But I'm also seeing the other side, right? Like, the big issue with online things for sex workers right now, I feel, is that websites are not acting under the PIPEDA, which is the privacy law that we already have in Canada for organizations which engage in commercialized activities. So under PIPEDA, there's already fines that exist to put on companies, and under the new, I think it's the Digital Charter Interpretation Act 2020, the new one that was proposed in December, there would actually be heightened fees. That's not what the issue is, though. The issue is that by preventing online content that is hosted by safer websites, we're actually forcing people to move onto encrypted, anonymized platforms, which is on the dark web. So the way to think of it, if I could make a metaphor, is you're shooting an arrow into a dark room. That's the dark web. So when we try and we catch exploitation or trafficking or abuse or whatever on the internet, on the dark web, it's very much like you're shooting an arrow into a dark room. We can't trace it. We can't track it. We can only get instances of action. So when there's a click or when an action happens, we can see that sometimes. So it really is like shooting an arrow into a dark room. What we're doing right now is we're forcing people who are consensually engaging in sexual activities commercially to move off of the surface web. We can think of it like an iceberg. I'll include it in my brief later. So when we move off the surface web and into the dark web, that then saturates the market on the dark web with consensual and exploitative material. Whereas if we were able to advertise consensual material and have that hosted on surface web areas, then those times when you shoot the arrow into the room and it hits something, you're way more likely to actually get someone who's committing a crime rather than wasting time, resources, legal capacity on trying to trace a person who's doing it consensually anyway. So what I feel the biggest issue is for sex workers. I currently work online for a substantial amount of my work, is that these laws and preventing people from advertising or having material hosted on these websites is making payment options like Visa, PayPal, MasterCard become removed. People are then resorting to cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies do not have a paper trail because they're encrypted through the different router system. It goes through one node, the entry node, and then there's all these relay nodes. I have a diagram. I'll include that also in my brief. So we're forcing people to use cryptocurrencies, which are decentralized and not able to have a paper trail. In this way, we're actually making it harder for us to intervene and to allow people to gather evidence. If there is an issue where someone is being exploited and they want to have something done about that, they can't have a paper trail. So to me, by forcing people onto encrypted, anonymized, dark web platforms and forcing people to use cryptocurrency, we're actually essentially forcing people to hide it way more than was ever the case before. And that to me is the biggest concern, because right now, by having Pornhub and their content available, we can actually see it. It's one thing to go on the internet and be like, oh, look, there's a video of me. It's another one to receive anonymized emails from the dark web from a video that you can't even see because it's on the dark web. That is way worse. That is so much worse. And by forcing people underground, that's the kind of scenario that we're making happen. So that I wanted to reply to both of you for that way.
Thanks so much. We're going to turn to our next questioner, Madame Goudreau.
Am I able to answer that question as well?
Unfortunately, our time is up for Madame Latanzio. Hopefully we have an opportunity during next rounds of questions. Madame Goudreau.
Bonjour, mesdames.
Good morning, ladies. I'm going to leave you a bit of time. I only have a few minutes. I think that your testimonies have borne fruit, but I'd like to go further together. There are many interpretations of the images that we perceive. I'd like to shed some light on, I'm new as a member of parliament, and colleagues know that I'm an entrepreneur, so I know what that means. But for several years, I was involved in psychosocial intervention work, and I come from the community milieu. So if I tell you that my responsibility is the concern for how we can all live together, how we can understand the issues. Ms. Lukens, I think your microphone is still on. I can hear you. So there's an issue right now. As members of parliament, we have to respect our system. And the system in which we live does not move at the pace of these issues and everything that is the information highway and the internet. So what we wanted to do, essentially, our committee is really struck to protect privacy and personal information. So this is the small window to be able to, as Ms. Wesley said, ensure that your safety, security, dignity is ensured so that you don't have worries about your work. Unfortunately, the finding, and this is something I'm not happy about, but this is yours, is that the fruit of our labors is something that make it possible with the Five Eyes. It's planetary. And within the committees, we have to have different testimonies, and we don't necessarily know what the different elements will be. But in this committee, it's really connected to public safety. And of course, we can't control what is being disclosed in the media or elsewhere. But I remember very clearly the questions that I asked and some of the things that I shared. And never did I make any judgment. On the contrary, I think of my teenagers who inadvertently may experience the kind of situations that you're so familiar with and that you've even experienced yourselves. And that was what was so unacceptable. So how to deal with it? Well, we can think about that. But this being said, when there's any amendment to legislation, of course, we have a duty to talk to the people who have experienced the issues so that we can quickly, even though our system is very slow and doesn't move at the same pace as what we're experiencing with technology and with the pandemic. I mean, I totally agree with what you said. But again, it's an issue of education. For you and for us, it's important to get to know each other, but to also understand how Parliament works. So what I would say, because I represent Quebec, in Quebec, we are quickly, and we've already implemented actually, consolidation, and now you're experiencing it. We're all caught in this. We have to take steps, but avoid you being subjected to collateral damage. So, of course, we all come from different areas. My studies were in psychology, sociology. So if you could, for a few moments, tell me about whether you see a difference between our committee and, let's say, status of women or public safety committees, because we want to protect. We want that whatever is done be done consensually and be under PIPEDA. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. 30 seconds each, please. Well, I'll start. Well, the fact that this committee is supposed to talk about protecting personal information and ethics, to see this subject taken by this committee was odd for us, given the New York Times article and the very ideological stance. It has nothing to do with that, really. So it's a conflation of all kinds of issues here. What we would have liked to see is this committee really was interested in this topic. The label of the inquiry should be, how can we protect the privacy of sex workers and the personal information of people who use the internet for sexual purposes? Perhaps we would have had a very different discussion and much more interesting conversation. And I'd also like to talk about the fact that I am a parent of a teenager, and I've been thinking about this from several different angles. And there is that instinct, when you see such huge and tough things as a parent with our children, and we're thinking how we have to protect them in this world from so many things, a million things at once. So it's easy to blame, sex industry, pornography, a pimp who's out in the bushes waiting to kidnap somebody. It's much more complex than this. We have to recognize that our youth, especially young women whose reality is not being considered necessarily in this discourse, these are beings who have sexual behavior, who make mistakes, who make poor decisions. And, we have to not have this dichotomy of victim and aggressor and dig a little deeper. And that's a conversation that our movement has been trying to have for a very long time. And this at the core of our conversations. The fact that we had to specify and specialize in this niche in terms of consent, because it's not for lack of interest. Well, I think what we should retain from all of this is that, the starting point, why are we here today, is because people want to eradicate the porn industry and sex education and the rights of the gays and trans people. And it is the work of these people which has led to this committee taking up this issue. So until such time as you recognize this history and the hatred, the extreme hatred that's being sent our way, it's a little difficult to move forward. So we always find ourselves in these situations where we have to respond and react to hatred rather than bringing our issues and contributing as experts. We're taken into a defensive position, and that's what's so difficult. So as long as this is the starting point for the work, and we're in a system where criminal legislation has a goal to eradicate us, it's very difficult to talk about safety, because the premise of eradicating sex workers and pornography means that there's no point in trying to make it safer. There's no point in trying to do anything to improve the working conditions and to stop certain forms of exploitation and non-consensual actions. So I think you have to choose at some point.
Mr. Angus now for the next round of questions. Mr. Angus.
Well, thank you for coming to our committee today. Ms. Clement, I want to follow up on a comment I thought I heard you say. I'm not sure. Did you say that you thought the existing laws that we have should just be applied?
I was speaking specifically about the ways that the laws around underage sexual activity, yeah. but I just want to specify that I am no expert in the laws around internet technology. I was speaking specifically about the way we view youth sexuality is problematic. I also mentioned that as well.
Yeah, okay. No, I'm interested because we did not get, we were very clear when we started this study that we do not have the mandate of status of women or justice, where discussions about sex work, I think, is very, very germane. Our focus was whether or not the laws protecting privacy images and non-consensual images are used. So I've been asking continually, don't we have laws? But the Liberal government's talking they're going to create a new regulator. It seems to me kind of a bizarre addition. Like either we have laws that protect on child pornography, and if it breaching the law, it gets taken down. It seems to be fairly straightforward. But what do you think of this idea of a regulator of online content?
I'll go back to what I was saying originally, and that's the problem with the conversation is that, and in this committee as well, is that there's a conflation of youth and adults. And so I don't know that it makes sense. I think you all, and I think Sandra put it extremely well just now, is that rather than pretending that you're all having the same conversation moving forward, I think you need to start from the beginning and really unmix all of the conversations you're having at the same time, because you're asking me about regulation of the internet in this moment. But I've also been watching the testimonies, and I've heard at the same time the way that people say, oh, I've gone home and now we have to think about our children in certain ways.
Okay, I know, but do you think a new regulator will change that?
We don't. New regulations aren't necessary. No,
okay,
that is sort of where, and we don't think any special regulations around the sex industry should be. But I would also like to say, in fairness, that you may have started with the mandate of, can you still hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, you may have started with the mandate around privacy, and that's one that we were really interested in. But the first person that you invited to this committee I was told by the clerk to frame the discussion, was somebody from Rape Relief who told you that sex work is exploitation, and that's how the conversation started.
Okay, so, thank you for that. I guess the issue here, and I'm just need to really clarify this, because we have a very simple mandate, which is the issue of whether or not images are being used without consent. That was what we started with. That was where we were at. We have received many briefs, and many briefs from across the political spectrum, as is people's right. Whether somebody doesn't like Madonna is not really something I'm interested in. I'm interested in whether the laws that we have are sufficient for people who are non-consensual. So this study did come from the New York Times article. That was it. I don't think it helps to say it's fabricated news or it's some kind of right-wing agenda. It was a very powerful question. Why would someone who was a child, whose images were being exploited, be put on Pornhub and you couldn't take it down? That was a straightforward question. And we thought those answers would be pretty straightforward to get. I spoke with a Pornhub executive who said to me he was very flummoxed by the refusal of Pornhub to deal with these. Apparently, he said it's a very small percentage of what their whole business model. They have a very profitable business model. I have absolutely no interest in the pornography industry, whether it's added to, whether it's not my issue. My issue is, why was Serena Flighta's video up there and she couldn't get it down? She was not a youth working in the sex industry. She was a child, period. So we have laws that should affect that. So I'm concerned, again, in terms of the issue of sex workers' rights and working in a safe space is all, I think, perfectly legitimate and fair to discuss. But for my committee, what I'm looking at in terms of the ethics committee is whether or not we have protections for those who it wasn't consensual. So when the RCMP told a survivor that they had no mandate to deal with taking down her sexual assault video because the terms and conditions of Pornhub protected them, I found that to be ridiculous, because the consent that was given was by her sexual assaulter, not by her. I could hear, you guys might think that these are, stories that are conflating and upsetting and attempting to, turn people's minds. To me, this is what I heard from witnesses. And I think if a survivor called the RCMP and said, listen, this was non-consensual, nobody believes survivors. They go to the police all the time. Sex workers, they don't believe. But I want to know that the laws that exist in this land for something like that has got to be pretty straightforward. Pornhub is an immensely powerful company. They have all the tools in the world. When these issues are raised, and they are raised about Pornhub because it is a Canadian company, we can deal with them. We can't deal with all the others, and it's not our mandate to deal with all the others. But when it's an issue of someone who said, this was an assault on me, and it's up there on the site, it should be fairly straightforward to have that taken down without impinging on any of the rights of sex workers. I think that's a pretty straightforward thing to do.
Can we respond? Or,
yes,
I'm sorry
thank you,
I'm
Mr.
writing notes and notes and notes here.
Yeah, okay, order please. The chair has asked me to take over the chair, so Mr. Angus will give the witness the chance to give a very short answer.
I was actually going to ask Ms. Lukings, because she looks into this stuff on the dark net.
Very good, thank you.
And she's been, I haven't heard her voice much, so I just wanted to hear, because she's, do we need to go to the dark net if we have laws to protect people who should be on the online legal platforms, to just say, no, that's a problem, take it down, the rest of the stuff is fine?
Okay, Shout out to Charlie Angus. Hey, I had dark hair when we met ages ago. What's up?
Where was that?
Newfoundland.
Oh, yeah.
I had dark hair, too. Jack Harris to be here. He wasn't here. Anyway,
He's smarter than me. He's smart. Well. That's why I called you out. Yes.
Okay. So to answer your question, so we were talking about what is actually required for companies. So looking beyond the issues of conflation and like actually getting to what the actual issue is here. Okay. So we have a company who's making money hosting content. We already know that in business under PIPEDA, you have a liability to protect the personal information. And we already know that technology exists, which allows us to, I think it's called fingerprint or Microsoft DNA or something like that. We also have automation technology, which is very, very available right now, that is able to scan images that are submitted and count the number of faces. And it can also identify different faces. So think of when you open your phone and it looks at you and it's like, oh, you showered and you look like a troll today, Melissa. We're not opening for you. And then I look normal and it opens. So each of these faces in a video would be identified as a different individual. I see no reason why the new Digital Charter Implementation Act and the new rules that are under PIPEDA, rather than regulating, is that we put a larger onus on the content host because it's going to have more fines anyway. So if we put a larger onus on the host to ensure that there is consent and fine those who don't follow those rules, I don't see why we couldn't have Pornhub and other websites hosting content on the surface web because people are going on the dark.
Okay, and I know I'm running out of time here, and I'm probably over.
Mr. Angus, you are out of time completely.
Can I ask Ms. Lukings to send us some? We have the new charter. We are going to be dealing with this at committee. I do a lot better when someone does my homework for me. Can you send me some of that sort of language about how we could actually embed it into the new charter? Thank you.
Absolutely. I did a 76-page research paper on it this semester. Got an A-.
Awesome. A-. Well, you're going to get an A+ at our committee.
I can't cite things. It's hard.
That's okay.
But I will absolutely send that within the next 24 hours. I can outline a full solution with graphs and images and everything.
Thank you. We'll turn to Mr. Carey now for the second round of questions. Mr. Carey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. And perhaps I can follow up with what Charlie was saying, because when we talk about the scope of the study, and we don't want to conflate, like we're looking at the protection of privacy and reputation on online platforms. That's what the study is about. And I think, Ms. Lukings, you mentioned the challenge with the dark web, and we've been talking about sex work, and I think that's incredibly important, and maybe that should be an entirely different study. But what I'd like to get at is the sharing of private, and what I want to talk about is non-consensual images on online platforms. And I was just wondering if you've been following the committee. Did you see the testimony from some of the victims earlier on in this study, Ms. Lukings?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of testimony from victims. I worked for a sexual assault center for a while as well, so I'm right there with you.
No, and I think realistically, like I heard Ms. Wesley say, it's about protecting privacy. You have mentioned the dark web, which is extremely dangerous, and you mentioned some ideas that you would have, because I think everybody here realizes that government has a role in protecting victims, but maybe the debate would be, what is that role? And I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on what you were saying about having a larger onus on hosts and what that would look like in your viewpoint.
Yeah, so the current rules under PIPEDA, they assign a fine to companies who violate the provisions that are related to privacy. So all businesses have to follow these rules and have a specific format for how they collect, use, handle, disclose, access, and allow people to access their own information as held by a company and as used by a company. When we do the Digital Charter Implementation Act, it wouldn't be far-fetched at all to increase the fine for online platforms without banning them entirely or making it impossible for them to operate, because it is the only, it's the harm reduction idea. It's the safer idea than forcing people onto the dark web where we literally have our hands tied. We can't intervene or help at all. So it's recognizing that with the Digital Charter Implementation Act, we have the opportunity to look to the future and say, all right, as much as we might like to say this is not okay to do this to people, by banning things and by prohibiting them, we're forcing them underground, right? How did prohibition work out? So we have this opportunity now to actually talk about what do we expect from social media? What do we expect from other platforms without putting the criminalization? See, this isn't about criminalization for me. It's about the rules for companies. So without criminalizing the actual people who are in the content, we can put the onus on the company to do user verification. So think about the same types of things that your bank might use. So you have a PIN, some online platforms will require you to submit your driver's license. If someone who is a user uploads content that has not been made consensually, that can be flagged, and then that immediately goes to the moderator. I actually also own a website and run a website, so I know how this works. And that can be flagged and then sent to the website owner, who then can go look up the user. You have their driver's license. We can track them. It's perfect. It works really, really well, way better than the dark web. So by increasing the amount of controls and security that the company has to do without regulating the actual people who are involved, but putting the onus on the company, reduces the criminalization of sex workers, makes finding and assisting people who are being exploited or who are having images uploaded non-consensually. It helps us to locate them and help them, and it gives them more power, because when you flag the video, it immediately comes down. We can do that. We have the technology to do all these things, and we can do it automatically. Automation is a real thing.
And I think as technology improves, we're, as one of my colleagues said, we're trying to keep up to it, but it's almost impossible. I've done a lot of work on human trafficking, and I think everybody is in agreement there. But when you have a young person plead with this committee about a way that we could work with regulators so that images could be taken down, anything you can send to the committee that would enlighten us would be greatly appreciated, because, talking about sex work, that's a whole other study, but we really want to focus on these sharing of private and non-consensual images on online platforms. So thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Curie. You're out of time. We're going to go to Madame Shanahan for the next 5 minutes. Madame Shanahan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. And I do want to thank our witnesses for appearing before us today on such short notice. The presentations, the points that each of the witnesses have been making has shown us that that this is a very complex subject, very nuanced, that there are other perspectives, and that we need to hear from more balanced witnesses. I move that in furtherance of the study of the protection of privacy and reputation on platforms such as Pornhub, that the committee hear from further witnesses at its next scheduled meeting for a minimum of 2 hours.
What kind of witnesses?
So Madame Shanahan has moved a motion, so we'll, I guess, is it the intent, Madame Shanahan, that you wanted to move into a debate with regards to that motion?
Yes, Chair. So I can present that motion
point
in
of order,
writing.
recognizing the point of order, Mr. Angus.
Well, we brought witnesses to testify, and Madame Shanahan says, thanks for coming. Now we're going to cut you off so we can talk about witnesses we don't know that may come. I think it's incredibly rude to the witnesses we have, and I think Madame Shanahan shouldn't be interrupting their opportunity to speak to our committee by throwing this wrench at us.
Okay, Madame Shanahan, I just wanted to provide some additional clarification. If in fact we move to a debate with regards to the motion, that would limit the ability for witnesses to complete their rounds of questions. Is that your intent, Madame Shanahan? I just want clarification on that.
I am moving the motion now for debate now.
So we
point of order, Chair.
Point of order, recognizing a point of order in the room, I believe.
Yep. Thanks, Chair.
Mr. Barrett.
Yeah. So the member opposite Ms. Shanahan's moved a motion in the middle of committee testimony. Normally with a table drop, something needs to be dropped on the table. So if before we continue the debate, I'd ask if you could suspend, and the paper copies can be circulated in the room and digital copies circulated online in both official languages.
Okay, that was my next move. I do believe that has been the usual activity of the committee when there's surprise motions, and so we will suspend our committee.
I'm sorry to the witnesses. This is really
apologize.
Never seen
to the witnesses.
This is crazy. This is crazy.
I'm going to suspend the meeting.
This is actually not crazy.
Wait.
Pardon me. Order.
Usually happens.
Shutting you down when you were speaking.
Okay, Mr. Angus. Order. I will now suspend the meeting so that it can be distributed to the members. If Madame Shanahan can get that over to the clerk, so the clerk can have it circulated to members in both official languages. It may take some time now, unless Madame Shanahan does have it in both official languages. I do apologize to our witnesses and to committee members.
Well, when do we come back?
But we will have to do this now. Meeting suspended. This meeting is now back to order. Colleagues, I will inform you on the record that we are still waiting for translation, and as committee members know, that the decision of this committee has been that we don't debate motions until they've been distributed in both official languages. We don't know what the rationale or what the reason is for the delay in translation, but we await that now. We have several people on the speaking order. I'm hopeful that we may come for a solution. I just wanted to verify again that Madame Shanahan, who's the mover of the motion, you are unwilling to adjourn the debate on the motion. Is that correct, Ms. Shanahan?
Chair, if there's unanimous consent to take up this motion on Friday, then we can hear from the witnesses now. But we need unanimous consent from all members that we take up the motion on Friday.
Okay, so the only thing we can do at this point to move forward is to allow for the debate on this motion to be adjourned, not to, I believe that it would be a debatable motion. If or not, it would be on Friday or a different date.
The debate to adjourn.
I think we have to just move to, if one of our colleagues was to move an adjournment on this debate, that would, if there's unanimous, there would have to be unanimous consent for the debate to be adjourned.
Chair.
Well, I move.
Chair.
What would that mean, Mr. Workington? Sorry.
Pardon me. The adjournment would mean that that there would no longer be a debate with regards to Ms. Shanahan's motion until such time was moved at a later date.
Yeah.
I'm getting a lot of cheers here, but I do have a speaking order. We'll move to Mr. Barrett first. Mr. Barrett's first on my speaking order here.
Well, thanks, Chair. That's why I was looking for your attention. You know, we had quite a bit of time left in the scheduled meeting. As Mr. Angus has pointed out, we have 2 minutes left until the scheduled end of the meeting. It's budget day, and members were expected to be in other locations. You know, I have not been a parliamentarian for as long as some others around this table, but I have been to a lot of committee meetings, and certainly it's the first time that I've seen witness testimony cut short with a table drop motion, looking for more witness testimony. The motion was provided in such a fashion that can only be viewed as to have been a dilatory tactic to avoid the other business that the committee had been dealing with on Friday past. Chair, with apologies for the waste of time to the witnesses that have appeared today, and in recognition that this motion that's been put forward has been used to waste the time of committee, I move that the committee do now be adjourned.
That is not a debatable motion, so I'll ask the clerk to assist me with a roll call with regards to that motion. Madam Clerk.
On motion of Mr. Barrett to adjourn, Mr. Dong.
No.
Mr. Fergus.
No.
Ms. Latancio.
No.
Madam Shanahan.
No.
Mr. Sorbara.
Absolutely not. No.
Mr. Barrett.
After having our time wasted, yes.
Dr. Carey.
Yes.
Monsieur Gould.
Wait.
Monsieur Fortin.
Par respect pour les témoins qui sont ici et pour le processus parlementaire.
Out of respect for the witnesses here in the parliamentary process and for democracy, I'm going to vote yes.
Mr. Angus.
Yes, this is we had 40 minutes. The witnesses could have talked. The Liberals blocked it. They filibustered. We have to shut this down, and we got to get this House in order. This is really
That's
embarrassing.
debate. Okay, point of order, Chair.
Yes,
order.
I'm voting.
Thank you.
I'm voting yes. I'm voting yes.
Honorable member knows the agenda
shut me down in a
colleagues, order.
Full witness.
Order, Mr. Dong. We're in the middle of a vote.
Yeah, we're in the middle of a vote.
Let's wait. Let's hear the outcome of the vote.
That's right. Exactly. Why did you debate?
Order, colleagues. Order, colleagues. Madam Clerk, what was the result of the vote, please?
4 pour, 5 against, contre, 5.
Let me just, pardon me, there was 4.
No, 5. Pour,
5.
5.
5-5. So the just verifying again, Madam Clerk, that's a tied vote.
Yes.
Okay. Well, it is customary for committee for clerks to allow for debate to continue. This is a challenging position because I know that members actually have to leave the room for other responsibilities. And so for that reason, I think I'll vote to adjourn simply because I don't know how I can continue without committee members being able to remain in place. So I'll vote to adjourn.
Okay.
Meeting adjourned.
Good.